All right, for those of you who I haven't had a chance to meet, my name is Tony Yang. I run the growth team here at Mucker Capital. Mucker Capital is an early stage VC focused on Series A and earlier, and we invest in startups all across actually the world. We have companies in different countries as well. My role as head of growth is I get to spend time with a lot of our great founders to help them scale their companies. And with me today is a longtime friend of mine, Glenn Gao. We've known each other for a very long time. We worked together on several occasions. And these days, he is a CEO coach, as you can tell from the slide. And so Glenn is going to walk us through his steps, best practices for how to be mindful and how to engage and make sure that you're utilizing your greatest asset in almost every company, which is your team. Glenn, welcome. Super excited. The floor is yours, my friend.
Thank you so much, Tony. I really appreciate the invitation. And let's jump in. As you may know, I coach CEOs. Let's start with what I often hear from my CEOs. Right now, especially, they feel like they're slogging through the mud, that things are harder than they thought they were going to be, that everything takes longer and it's tiring. One of my CEOs said to me recently, Glenn, I'm not sure I want to do this. Well, if the CEO feels that way, imagine how your employees feel. How do you improve people's performance when they think the going is just tougher than they expected? They need to be motivated to perform. Let's look at motivation. But before we do, while this statement is true, let's acknowledge that the hardest job of the CEO is human behavior change. People don't like to change. People fear change. They're worried they'll be worse off after the change. They worry they may fail. They worry they'll have to push beyond their current limiting beliefs. To get people to change, we have to understand their motivations. I was a CEO for 25 years. I was in venture for 5 years, where I started coaching CEOs. I've been coaching CEOs for 8 years. And in my experience working with many CEOs, here are the 5 factors that motivate employees. Let's look at each one and what you can do as a CEO to enable your employees to perform at the highest level. The first one is money. I'll speak about each of these subtopics around money next. Many studies have shown that for most employees, after a certain dollar amount, money is no longer the most important thing. One of my CEOs targets a minimum of the median compensation for most employees. Why? The CEO explains that the pay plan to employees, the CEO explains the pay plan to employees and then offers more on the upside in equity and bonus. This CEO wants employees to know that they're being paid fairly and have an opportunity to be paid a lot. My recommendation to you is pay fairly, but don't react every time that you're worried about losing an employee by giving them more money. You're often wasting your money if you do that. But there's an exception to this rule. The exception is most salespeople. One of my CEOs has said, Glenn, I agree that money is not the most important motivator for most people, but I want people who are highly motivated by money in my sales organization. I want them striving to make more money, which will help the company make more. I want them narrow-mindedly focused on making a lot of money. That CEO tests for money as a motivator and makes that a key factor in hiring. One of my CEOs is quite brilliant in the way they discuss compensation. She always prefaces the discussion about what an employee's compensation looks like today, assuming we will fulfill our vision of achieving a certain valuation. She speaks about the value of the future. Invariably, the equity makes up the vast majority of the overall comp. Now, what this CEO is doing is called framing. When you let people focus on only their base salary when they think about comp, then they walk around with a small number in their head. This CEO frames the comp discussion always around a big number. the CEO is placing a big number in the head of the employee. Even if the employee doesn't fully buy into the eventual value of the company, they still have a much bigger number than their salary in their on-target earnings, or their on-target earnings in their head. Framing works. Use it. Overpay your superstars. The average CEO has 6 to 8 leaders reporting to them. We will often spend time on the 1 or 2 that are a problem. The other day, I heard a CEO talk about the incredible performance of an employee. The CEO was just gushing about what this employee did. I stopped him right there and said, pay that person more right now. It can be a spot bonus or a raise or an equity grant, but pay them more. Don't wait to discover that some other company has found out about this employee and tries to entice them with higher comp. Use higher comp as a retention tool for your superstars. Make it hard for them to leave. Now, Tony, I'm going to pause here for a second. I don't know if there are any questions in the Q&A. I don't think so. So if not, I will just move on. I assume you're going to read them to me if they pop up.
Yeah.
And I welcome questions from everybody who's listening. That's the best part of the presentation, is when I get Q&A. So please do jump in. The next key motivator is autonomy. I'll speak about each of these on the right: clarity on key results, what to do, not how to do it, and delegate. Clarity around key results. Most of my CEOs use OKRs. Whether or not you use OKRs, you need a management framework that enables every employee to clearly understand what they're being measured on. If you are clear, and you know your employees are clear about what you want them to do, then you can give them the autonomy they desperately desire. If you're not clear, you're opening yourself up to disaster. Don't tell people how to do things. Tell them what to do, and let them surprise you with their results. My best CEOs spend a great deal of time nailing down the key results they want. They also invest in a planning process to ensure the person taking on the work has a good plan to get there. Then they get out of the way. I recommend you do the same thing. Delegate. Before I talk about this, I need to cover one very important topic. The most important job of the CEO is to build a great leadership team. Without that great team, you can become very skilled at delegating, but you'll be delegating to people who can't get the job done to your satisfaction. When I was a CEO, I focused on becoming a master delegator. To do this, you have to do 3 things. Provide great clarity about what you want and when you want it. Practice active listening to ensure that person fully understands. And tell the person what priority it is compared to everything else they have on their plate. One of my CEOs was complaining that the things they want to get done just aren't getting done. This CEO was just saying what they wanted and hoping that people understood. The CEO didn't put a deadline on it, and they didn't confirm if the person understood or not. And they assumed the person knew how to prioritize the task. As a result, nothing was getting done. By following these 3 steps, you have now given that person the autonomy they need to get something done. The next key motivator is mastery. I'll speak about each of these 3 issues on the right in turn. Can you guess what the one thing your employees truly care about is? Themselves. As much as we'd like them to care about the company and the mission, and that all takes a back seat to themselves. Furthermore, that means that they are always thinking about not just the job they have today, but their career. What do we do with this information? We help our employees see that by working for you, they can attain mastery faster. That working for you is good for their career. I recommend you provide employees with an opportunity to better themselves. This can be in the form of informal training or challenging assignments with someone looking over their shoulder. Some call this training. Some people are opposed to training. They say, I run a startup. We don't have time for training. You may have seen this quote before, one of my favorite quotes. The point is, you need to train people one way or another. Don't think of it as formal training or time-consuming training. Think of it as daily, informal, small lessons to help them succeed. Imagine your company is going to battle against a fierce competitor. Well, actually, you are every day. You want your very imperfect, often undertrained employees to be equipped with whatever they need to win. When I was a CEO, I used my one-on-ones as the time to train. It was simple, yet highly effective. Not only was I helping the company as a whole get better, but I was providing my employees with the opportunity to better themselves, something they were unlikely to get anywhere else. People thrive on challenges. People grow with the right kind of challenges. People can achieve mastery by overcoming challenges. One of my CEOs was laying out some very ambitious product development targets. Before pushing these targets on the engineering team, though, she stopped and asked the head of engineering, can you really do this? A great leader understands that a target should be hard to reach, but not too hard to reach. The person taking on the challenge has to believe it will be hard, but also believe it's possible. This CEO was testing to ensure she wasn't pushing the team to do something they felt was impossible. When someone is faced with a challenge that feels difficult but possible, they get much better at their job. They're getting closer to mastery. The next motivator is purpose or belonging. I'll speak about each of these issues next. We all want to belong, to be part of something bigger than ourselves. There are two ways to do this: through company purpose or through being part of a group or tribe. You probably have a vision or purpose statement. This is a great start. Some companies have a purpose that is bigger than just making money. Maybe they're in healthcare or microfinance or in sustainability or in climate tech. If you are, you want to leverage this. One of my CEOs always talks about how the work they are doing is actually saving lives. This CEO is constantly reminding employees about the lives they save. Because this CEO has a purpose that goes beyond making money, they want people to wake up in the morning excited about saving lives, not just making money. Sometimes, though, your company is not saving the world. That's okay. What you can focus on is the innate human desire to be part of a tribe. When mankind was first developing, being part of a tribe meant that you could survive. If you were left alone without your tribe, you would die. The oldest part of our brain still holds these survival mechanisms. This is why we're upset when we're not invited to a party, and why we're so excited when our favorite sports team wins. These are all tribal instincts. Realizing this, one of my CEOs is enforcing 3 days a week in the office in 3 different hubs in the United States. Further, he's bringing everyone together once a quarter for an all-hands in-person meeting. He understands the value of tribes. And the next motivator is acknowledgments. I'll speak about each of these on the right. People are hungry for positive feedback. It's so easy to offer and unfortunately very infrequently given. One of my CEOs said, "No one has ever come up to me and said, 'Stop giving me positive feedback. Stop acknowledging me my good work. You're doing it too often.' Everyone wants more. It's free and easy. Give more acknowledgments." All hands meetings are great opportunities to acknowledge people. When I was a CEO, I prepared for my all hands meeting by thinking through a small number of people I wanted to publicly acknowledge. Then I asked my leadership team to do the same. Then I opened the floor for anyone to acknowledge anyone else. 3 things happen when we acknowledge others in a public forum. The first is we teach others what kind of behavior we really want from them. The second is those who receive public accolades feel great about themselves. And the third is those who don't get them ask themselves, how can I get one of these? People are hungry for public acknowledgement. And since we're talking about positive feedback already, the other two factors to consider are timeliness and specificity. Don't let more than a week go by before you provide an acknowledgement. Be specific. This is the most important point. Here's something I want you to really understand. The people you want on your team really want to please you. They really want to do the right thing and receive an acknowledgement for doing the right thing. Why? Because you are the CEO. You hold their future in your hands. Whether it's a bonus or promotion or more equity, you will decide that. What people seek is clarity about how to please you. OKRs provide some clarity, but when you provide specific feedback about a job well done, then the nuances of what results in you being pleased, the CEO, becomes clear. So it's not enough to say, Jane did a great job of getting the last release out on time. Jane and everyone else in the company needs to understand what it was that you were actually so happy about. Great feedback goes like this. Jane did a great job of getting the last release out on time. In one case, when she was stuck, she went to marketing to talk about potential product trade-offs. When she heard from the engineering team that they would be delayed, she asked what she could do to help them make the deadline. Then, during the last sprint, she worked over 2 entire weekends to ensure everything was in place to enable the team to come together to make the deadline. Her focus on collaboration, her listening to the needs of her fellow team members, and her willingness to put in the extra hours made this happen. Thank you, Jane. Now that is great feedback. All right, now I am going to pause here and see if I can encourage any questions. I have more to cover today, but I've covered all the motivators of employees, and I would love to hear if anybody has any questions about how this works in reality.
Yeah, people are starting to ask some questions. I have one for you, Glenn. So earlier you had mentioned, you talked about training as a motivator and CEOs taking advantage of one-on-one meetings with their team members for training purposes. Do you have any tips or recommendations on how to best utilize that kind of context? Because a lot of times one-on-ones, and I've been, there on, the other side of the table, which ends up becoming more reporting. These one-on-ones is, hey, this is what happened, this is what we did, and how do you shift from that to become more of a training type of conversation?
So it's a great question, Tony, and it starts from a mentality. Now, the thing we're doing here is we're not attempting training, rather we're trying to transfer knowledge so that my person on the other side of the table is becoming a master at what they do. So mastery is the motivator. And the way we do this is, or the way I have done this, and many of my CEOs do this, is before entering that one-on-one, we change the way we're thinking about the purpose of the one-on-one. Sure, there's reporting, but there's also problem solving, and there's knowledge transfer. And so when I or one of my other CEOs who do this really well are in a one-on-one, what they're trying to do is help that individual understand how the CEO thinks. See, we can't train about what to do in every unique situation, but we can train people on how to think like a CEO. The CEO role uniquely can see everything that's happening in the company. Anyone who's a direct report to the CEO only understands one part of that company, and that's all we're asking them to do. But ultimately, if they can think more broadly, they can think about the impact across the organization. This is how a CEO thinks. They're going to think more holistically about how to address problems and how to take advantage of opportunities. And so I always focused on, here's how I think, here's why I think this way, here's how this is going to enable you to come up with a better end result.
Okay, great. There's actually a question from the audience that is tied to that, and I do have a follow-up question to that as well. So from the audience, when we're talking about providing some autonomy to our employees, when you tell them what to do and not how to do it, but you tell them what to do, and you mention let them surprise you. Well, what if they don't rise up to the occasion? What if they don't surprise you? What do you do then?
Well, we have some choices to make. If they're not surprising us, the first thing we want to do is we want to let the employee know they're not surprising us. So something's missing. So we want to communicate in a way that something is missing in my expectations of the CEO that are being delivered by that employee. And it might be initiative. It might be collaboration. It might be creative thinking, but we want to tell them what's missing. And we encourage that employee. I suggest very strongly that every employee you have has some kind of personal development plan. And so right then and there in the one-on-one, you can add to the personal development plan and say, I really need a lot of creativity when you're coming up with these ideas. And here's why. This is how I think about it. Here's why that's to your benefit.
Okay, great. So one of my follow-on questions is related to just this overall topic, right? I think it's very geared towards the founder/CEO, who is the bulk of our audience and the people we work with on a regular basis. But, we do have people who join these sessions and that are part of their management team, not necessarily the CEO. And so do you have any specific tips on how people in those type of positions can figure out how to best leverage, perhaps one or two employees underneath them, people on their team? Because, maybe the head of sales for one of our early stage startups may not necessarily have the complete power to just on the spot give a raise to one of their employees, right? Or maybe there is. So, but from that type of context, what are some of your recommendations for people in those type of positions?
So let's use your example. Let's say I have an employee that's doing in RevOps, doing some amazing work for me, and I'm the head of sales, and I want to do something special for them. I'm going to give them feedback very, very quickly based on that. But I'm also going to go to my CEO and say, hey, I want to give this person a spot bonus. Here's why. I'm going to make a case for that. Or I want to give this person a promotion, and I'm going to make a case for that. And so I'm going to try to do that before I have my one-on-one, but I'm not going to delay. The worst thing you can do is delay positive feedback for 2 or 3 weeks. You want to do it as quickly as possible. And then you can come back later and give them a reward for that. And so as a manager, I would fight for a reward if that's one of the things I want to provide. The other thing, Tony, is all the motivators stay the same for every single employee. And so if I'm just a manager of 2 individuals, I know what the motivators of employees are, and I'm going to make sure when I think about the things we discussed about money, that's where I have to go fight for them, autonomy, mastery. I'm going to give a great deal of positive feedback, and I'm going to create a purpose for my small group and encourage my team to be part of a tribe.
Great. Awesome. There are a couple more questions, but let's continue with your presentation, and then we'll address those that just came in some point in the later down the line.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Okay. Let me get a quick sip of water. Okay, but what about you? We just talked about how to motivate your employees to get to their highest level of productivity. How do you get to peak productivity? Today, I'll cover founder burnout, how to recognize it, and what to do about it. Let's start with the signs of burnout. Ask yourself if you have any of these. Emotional signs like persistent feelings of exhaustion or cynicism or disillusionment. This might even extend to a loss of passion for your work or a growing sense of isolation and frustration. Physical symptoms like chronic fatigue or getting sick really often or not sleeping well, these can directly impact your day-to-day productivity. And behavioral changes. Notice your shifts in work performance, such as I'm not very productive, or I'm making more mistakes, or I'm having more conflicts with my team members. If you have any of these, you might be on your way to burnout. Now, I want to tell you a story. One of my CEOs ran a very successful company for more than a decade. He eventually sold the company at a huge multiple. By all measures, he was a massive financial success. 6 months after the acquisition, he came to me and he said, I have some news I want to share with you, Glenn. My company was a huge success. I have more money than I'll ever be able to spend. But just after the acquisition happened, my wife left me. My kids no longer speak to me. I had a full mental breakdown. This is a true story. He said, I've mostly recovered from that mental breakdown, but it will be a long journey. I asked him, what happened? He said that the pressure of running the company was something he never fully realized. He gave that company his all, and it built up within him in a way that he didn't recognize, and it broke him once he sold the company. Now, he's okay now, but I want you all to know that this could be you, and trust me, you don't want that. Let's talk about how to prevent burnout. I'll speak about managing expectation, prioritizing, pushing back, getting support, and putting your oxygen mask on first. The first concept is to manage expectations. Manage expectations with everyone. For the sake of brevity, I'll talk about managing expectations with your employees and your board. While Jeff Bezos was running Amazon, he became a master at managing expectations. One of the ways he did this was to say, we're going to run this experiment, whatever this might be, like buying our own trucks for delivery, for example. We don't know how it's going to work out. We can guess, but we can't accurately predict the outcome. Therefore, what we're going to measure are the inputs, not so much the outputs. We're going to measure what we can control. He had very high expectations about those inputs and got people to perform at a very high level. But he often eliminated the expectations around the outputs because they were unpredictable. This enabled Amazon to create new things at a blistering pace without suffering from disappointment when it didn't work out. They knew they did their best on the input side. Now, when managing your board, let me share with you several best practices I've learned from my CEOs. When you're asked to give a number, don't give a number, give a range. If you think you're going to achieve 5 million in ARR, give a range like 4.8 to 5 million in ARR. See, if you give a single number like 5 million, the board remembers 5 million. That's all they remember. And if you achieve 4.8 million, it will be viewed as a miss. Don't sandbag, but be realistic about the range you give. If the board says 4.8 million isn't enough, then have that discussion at the beginning of the year. Resist the temptation to raise the number just because a board member wants it. If you manage their expectations and beat your target, they will be happy. If you miss, they will be disappointed. And finally, deliver bad news early. The minute you believe that you may not make the number, let the board know. Do not surprise them. This is a way to manage their expectations. Another key area is to prioritize. This slide represents Stephen Covey's 4 quadrants, which you might be familiar with. One of my CEOs felt compelled to answer every email or Slack message from board members and to do so immediately. He assumed those questions were in the upper left box of both urgent and important, but they weren't. Together, we changed the way he managed his relationship with the board so he could prioritize appropriately. He began asking himself, how important is this question compared to everything else I'm working on? How urgent is it for me to get back to the board member right now? He began simply asking the board members these questions when he discovered, and what he discovered was that very often the question wasn't even that important to the board member, and most of the time was not urgent. He was able to then focus on the things that were most important. Now, note on this slide that the bottom section, the not important, you're not even going to do this work. You're either going to delegate it or eliminate it. These are fantastic ways to prioritize. Another key area is to push back. We talked about delegation earlier, but what if you're the smartest person in the room? What if you know most of the answers? What often happens is that employees come to you for the answers. After all, that's the shortest path to the answer, right? Yes, it is, but it isn't scalable. When I was the CEO, I used to answer all the questions that came my way because I wanted people to go off and do their job and be as efficient as possible. But then I started pushing back when I got questions. When I started doing this, my employees hated it because it looked like I was making their jobs harder. I would tell them to go back and think about it and make me a recommendation. They hated that, but they did it. They would bring me a recommendation and I might make a few tweaks to it. Eventually, their recommendations became better and better. Then they'd suggest something to me and I'd just send back a one-word note, approved. And I kept saying this, approved. And then a magical thing happened. I approved their recommendations so many times that they finally said to themselves, why do I even need to bring this up to Glenn and waste his time? He's just going to approve it anyway. And they stopped coming to me for most things and just did them. This is what I wanted all along. Not only does this prevent burnout, but it helps your team grow. It helps the company scale because your people have more capabilities, and it enabled me to focus where I could add the most value. Push back. Get support. The CEO job is the loneliest job. You can't tell your board everything you think. You can't share your doubts and concerns with your direct reports. You usually can't share things with your significant other. But you need some type of support. I don't care what kind you get, but get something. You can get a CEO coach or create a group of other CEOs or try some online forums or spend time with friends who understand your business. But one way or another, get the support you need so you can share your biggest fears, your biggest worries and concerns, and get great advice on how to make your hardest decisions. Finally, put your oxygen mask on first. I used to think this phrase was odd. I mean, shouldn't I put the oxygen mask on someone else first? But I realized that if I didn't take care of myself, I wouldn't be here to take care of anyone else. This is where most of my CEOs fail. They don't carve out time to take care of themselves. It's not hard, it just takes commitment. One of my CEOs goes on meditation retreats. And these are silent retreats. He does not take phone calls when he is gone. He's taught the company to execute in his absence. And you know what? When he comes back, everything's fine. One of my CEOs is a serious bodybuilder. He says if he doesn't work out every day, he isn't himself at work. One of my CEOs owns several nightclubs. He calls this his hobby, and it gives him great pleasure at a time when work is not giving him much pleasure. One of my CEOs coaches his daughter's softball team. Find the right combination of things for you that help you get to a place where you're not burned out and can perform at your highest level. Take care of yourself, and you will see the benefits in your performance at work and the performance of your company. So thank you for sharing your time with me. If you have questions that we don't address today, you can always email me, or I have developed the world's first AI CEO coach on my website. It doesn't cost you anything. You don't have to fill out a form. It's available 24/7, and it's designed and trained to communicate with CEOs and answer questions. So if I don't get anything for you covered today, feel free to go there and use it for free. So I think we may have some other questions, Tony, and if we do, I'd love to engage with the audience.
Sure. Yeah, we do have several questions. So let's jump into this one first. Okay, so two-part question. As a founder, how can a startup founder enhance their team's performance when everyone is working remotely? So that's a very common scenario these days. Specifically, how do you motivate employees through, so that they can follow through and become masters of their domain to, surprise the CEO? So how do you manage remote?
I'll share with you some of the experiences of my other CEOs. Some CEOs have figured this out, and so that's what I want to share with you. They recognize for not every company, but for many companies, we're going to live in a remote world where some percentage of the employees are going to be remote. They use a framework, like I said, they usually use OKRs, and they use a waterfall process on OKR. So every employee has between 1 and 3 key results during a single quarter. And that focuses their energy on what it is they're there to get done. And so they shift, that CEO now has shifted their mindset from, gee, is that person working Friday afternoons? Or maybe they're golfing Friday afternoons. Instead of asking that question, the CEO is saying, are they making progress against the key result? And so one way they do this is in every one-on-one, at the very top of the agenda is, how are you doing against your key results? And those key results are written out. And the CEO does not own the responsibility for asking or answering those questions. Their direct report owns the responsibility for answering those questions. And the most effective way I've seen this done is red, yellow, or green. Let's just start. Answer. For key result number 1, I have to achieve $1 million in ARR this quarter. Is it red, yellow, or green? And if it's green, we may not need to talk about it. If it's yellow or red, then it's the responsibility of the direct report to bring a recommendation on what to do about that. So notice, this CEO is not focused on how hard is this person working. This CEO is focused on, are they making progress against the plan? And in every one-on-one, there's an opportunity to teach and to evaluate that employee. Are they actually doing what I expect them to do? Are they reaching out beyond my expectations to do things in a way that are going to help them get there or not? It's a fantastic mechanism. The second thing they do is they recognize that every employee has different needs for human connection. So there's actually there's a neurochemical called oxytocin in our brain. And if I'm not looking you in the eye over Zoom, I'm not getting any oxytocin. If I can't hear your voice, I'm not getting any oxytocin. Zoom gives us a tiny bit of it. If I can look Tony in the eyes and I see Tony smile and I connect with him, I get a little bit of oxytocin, but not a lot. Some people need a lot of that human connection neurochemical. And that happens when people get together. And so my CEOs are trying to gauge, what are the requirements of each of the employees? How often do I need to bring them together? And they're willing to spend a fair amount of money if I have a completely remote team to bring them together at least once a quarter, where everybody has a chance to spend time together and get that oxytocin fix.
Got it. Okay, great. Thank you. The person that did ask a second follow-up question, which you kind of answered through your discussion about OKRs just now. So I'll just repeat the question, and then maybe you can hammer that home. So the second part of the question is, as an employee of a startup, how can this person benchmark their work when there are no other peers? So sounds like it's a small company, right? And maybe there's just only one person in that role.
So the question was benchmark their worth?
Their work.
Oh, their work.
Yes. And even with, I guess, limited feedback. And so it sounds like OKRs is a great mechanism to identify what those are and how you measure yourself up against those. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
So the tricky part here is going to be with limited feedback. That's a big challenge. And so if I were an independent contributor reporting to a manager and I wanted to benchmark my work, I would open up that conversation with my boss to say, hey, here's something that's important to me. And I'd like to discuss this in every one-on-one. Just how am I doing? I'd like to just get a tiny bit of feedback from you. And I'd love to hear from you, my manager. What can I do to overperform? So I have these key results you want me to go against. Would it be to be more creative, to be more collaborative, to reach out to others to see how I can contribute? What are you looking for from me so that at the end of the quarter, you can say, I'm achieving above your expectations? And even if you're not getting that direct feedback, and I know sometimes it's hard, if you continually ask that question, your manager will finally understand that I have somebody who's truly motivated here. I should help them understand what it's going to take to be even more successful.
Okay, great. Thank you. Just even earlier, you were also talking about recognizing preferences of your team members, and oxytocin as a neurological chemical that is one of these requirements. So along the same vein, how do you identify and overcome perhaps cultural differences and requirements of a team in terms of understanding what motivates them and what they need in order to become more productive employees? So cultural differences.
So I'll describe it this way. It goes beyond just cultural differences. And cultural differences are part of my answer here, is that the best CEOs are what I call chameleon CEOs in the way they communicate. So they recognize that when I communicate, let's say I'm the CEO, when I communicate with Tony, Tony likes Zoom calls, he likes visuals, and I need to make sure that when I communicate with Tony, I'm giving him what he needs to receive information in the way he receives it. But Britton likes written information. And so I'm going to communicate with her more via email or text or Slack. Others might need verbal communication. And so we're going to spend more time talking through things, because the objective of the CEO is to communicate effectively with each individual. So this applies to cultural differences as well. People have different ways of being, and the CEO is not asking everybody to change to their style. That's almost impossible. Instead, the CEO is going to recognize, for me to be effective in communicating to a different culture or a different way of thinking or a different way of learning, I'm going to adjust the way I communicate to ensure it lands and it works.
Here's a question about feedback. Some CEOs avoid providing feedback to prevent the appearance of preference for particular team members. Have you come across that scenario before? If so, what are your recommendations for avoiding that?
So I'm going to answer the question from the perspective of the CEO. This goes back to my point about paying superstars more money. You should absolutely give more feedback to the people who are better. Okay, so that if I say, oh, I gave great feedback to Britton in the last 3 meetings, I can't give it to her again. Well, no, that's not true. If Britton is a superstar and she's representing the kind of behavior I want from every employee in the company, I'm going to give her feedback in every damn meeting. Okay, I want people to understand what it takes to be successful working for me. It's not about the individual so much. It's about training my people to understand what I want them to do and how I want them to do it.
There's a question that came earlier on in the presentation when you talked about building a great leadership team, which is very important for the CEO. What are your thoughts on the best ways to do that? Meaning, this person is wondering, should you build and promote within your organization as it grows and as individuals grow, or whether or not you should bring on someone from the outside? Very common scenario.
So a couple ways to think about this. In a perfect world, I would promote internally. The challenge is, if I'm a part of a fast growth company, what happens is I hire an individual often because they're really great at what they do and they fill a need that I have. But 6 months or a year or 2 years later, I have a different set of needs because the company has grown. The question is, has this person scaled? Not can they scale, have they actually scaled their capabilities, let's say from an individual contributor to someone who can be a manager? There's a small percentage of people, the minority of people can actually scale and grow with a company. If they can, I'm very likely to promote them. But more often than not, in a scaling company, I'm going to wind up eliminating those people because they were good for a company at a certain size and they're not good for a company at the current size. Having said that, that means I'm often looking externally for talent, because maybe I was a $2 million company and now I'm a $7 million company. I need somebody who can take us from 10 to 30 million, and they're probably not inside my company today.
Got it. Okay. So there's another question that we come across quite a bit, which is, how do you as a CEO, handle difficult situations, or, something hit the fan that's pretty major?
When something, when it hits the fan for the company as a whole?
Yeah, for the whole company, right? Like let's just say, I mean, look, the last several years, the world changed, and lots of businesses have to shift in terms of how they
Sure.
operate, and, lower budgets and things like that. So I guess the crux of the question is, how do you manage negative information, and, how do you continue to motivate your team in
Sure.
that situation?
Sure. So this is one of the more challenging situations for CEOs, or even managers. The first thing is, look, don't lie, because people can see through your lie. If you try to make it sound like it's really not that big a deal, don't worry about it, people are going to worry about it. And that's much worse. That demotivates people, because all of a sudden they believe things are worse than they really are. And secondly, they no longer trust you. So ultimately, you're trying to create trust with the organization. You're trying to be a leader that people want to follow. And so you just don't lie. Now, then you have to come clean and say, well, look, our target was $1 million ARR. We only hit $500,000. We're going to have to cut costs. We're going to have a RIF. We're going to reorganize. You have to let people know, but you have to be prepared to act quickly after that bad news. Okay, one of my CEOs came up with a process I'll share with you. In this particular example, I want to share with you. They were working with me over about a 2-week period, saying, okay, we're going to have to cut deeply. And so we developed a 1-day process, which was, hey, we're having an all hands meeting Thursday morning. And in the all hands meeting, it was a very short meeting. The CEO announced, we're going to be doing reduction in force. And each of you who is going to be let go will get an email in the next hour. And you'll be invited to a Zoom meeting that all are going to happen before 1 o'clock today. If you don't get one of those invitations, you're still going to be here. And then we're going to have another all hands meeting at 3 o'clock today to review what just went on. So I thought that was a brilliant way to handle it. And then in that all hands meeting at the 3 o'clock, this is where you can't lie. You say, this is what happened. This is why this happened, because we have to focus on the success and health of the company. And then, very, very importantly, you tell what you're going to be doing next. You talk about your vision, even if your vision is transformed because of this result, because even if you have to make a big pivot, even if you're going to take on new ways of working, you have to share with the company what you're going to be doing going forward, because you want people to want to follow you. The definition of a great leader is you have followers. And so how do you create followers? First is that honesty, but secondly, you have to give them hope. You have to give them vision about what the future looks like. And you have to believe that yourself. And so you have to create that belief that things are going to be, you don't want to overpromise. It's not like, oh, everything's going to be great, but rather you say, this is what we're going to do. We're narrowing our focus, and we're lowering our targets, but we are going to be successful. And as long as you're committed to that, you can say that with honesty.
Great. Let's stay on that topic of reduction in force, layoffs, and things of that nature. So I've heard a saying before, which for better or for worse, when I was working in startups in the Valley, and that saying was, hire slow, fire fast. I don't know if you ever heard that before, Glenn.
Oh yeah.
So wanted to know, your thoughts on that. This is, like, especially important for CEOs who are looking to scale their teams.
Sure.
Hiring the right person is extremely important, obviously, at very early stages, at any stage, but especially at the early stage. So in that vein of that statement, how do you respond to that? How do you identify the times when, perhaps an individual is struggling? How do you know when to pull the trigger and say, this is not a good fit, or give them some time to right the ship, to start moving in the right direction? How do you manage that as a CEO?
Oh, it's so easy. So let me go back to something I said earlier. The number one job of the CEO is to build a great leadership team. It's also the hardest thing to do. And so a great deal of your energy and focus should be on building a great leadership team. On average, CEOs have between 6 and 8 people reporting to them. And on average, 2 of those are not working out all the time. So now let's go look at those 2 individuals that are not working out. The CEO has to make a decision pretty quickly when they know something's not right here. They have to ask themselves this question: is this person a keeper? And I'll define what I mean by that. By keeper, it means if I, as the CEO, am willing to invest time and energy at getting that person from, let's say, a B to an A, and I know it's going to take 3 months to get them from a B to an A, am I willing to invest that time? Because it's going to take a lot of energy from me to invest that time. So if the answer is yes, then they're a keeper. I think they have fantastic potential. They just need more coaching to get there. And I'm going to make a commitment to keep them. But if I say to myself, I can't afford to do that. I don't have 3 months to get this person up to speed. We're in a startup. We have to move fast. And we have a lot of very large expectations. Then I've made a decision they're not a keeper. I'm going to get rid of them. Now the question is, how do I limit my downside? If there were no downside, I would say you reach out to that person immediately and you terminate them. You terminate them correctly, okay, in the context of what state you're in, the laws and all of that. But you terminate them quickly. If there's downside, okay, let's say it's the head of sales, which is one of the biggest turnover roles, by the way. I think I'm not going to be able to close 3 of our biggest deals this quarter if I let that person go right now. Then you begin a search. And you begin a search quietly, because that that search is going to take time, because you're protecting your downside. And you're essentially trying to get to a point where you're going to let that person go, but you have a process. You don't even have to have a person ready to replace them, but you have a process in flight to replace them. I'll make one exception to the rule I just gave you. It's that if this person is toxic, okay, if the person is toxic, you cannot even see the downside that is being caused by that individual being in your company, even if they're the head of sales. You need to greatly accelerate exiting them from the company, because they're hurting every other person they touch, and they may be hurting your employees, your clients too.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question, and this is actually a question that I wanted to ask, which is related to the second part of our conversation or the presentation, preventing burnout. So how do you as a CEO recognize when your team is about to experience burnout, and how do you either prevent that or address those that are already feeling burned out? Let's close with that.
Okay, great. So I hope you'll send this presentation out to people. So the signs of burnout are in this presentation. They have to do with, you notice some emotional distress, or people are not performing at the level you expect, or even they're just acting irritated. One of my CEOs did something I thought was brilliant. He went around and he looked at what kind of PTO people had gone through. And he walked up to certain people that either hadn't taken enough PTO, or he was recognizing some signs of burnout. And he said, hey, when are you thinking about taking some time off? And it blew people's minds away, because no CEO ever said, hey, I want you to take some time off. And yet he was doing this intentionally, because he knew that was going to help that person. They were a keeper, somebody who wanted in the organization, and he could tell that the pressure was building up. And so he encouraged them to take time off. And that did a couple things. One, taking time off can help a great deal prevent burnout. But the other is it showed the support of the CEO. And so people are less likely to be burned out if they feel like they're in a supportive environment.
Great. Awesome. Thank you. All right. Well, let's wrap up. Glenn can be reached at his email address, Glenn with 2 N's at glengao.com. If you have additional questions, feel free to reach out to him or myself as well. And lastly, if you are an entrepreneur, if you're a founder and need help, whether it's CEO coaching or growth advice or knowing how to manage your burn rate, we do have several different programs. Well, one, we have a accelerator program, but two, even if an accelerator is not right for you and you just need additional help, reach out to us. We're here, we're a resource, and this is what we do. We help our founders succeed. And so if you are interested in the accelerator program, go to mucker.com/muckerlab-accelerator and apply there. But otherwise, we are easily reachable. Glenn is very friendly and welcomes people to reach out to him, myself as well, and Britton. So thanks again, Glenn, for spending time with us. And for all of you who joined us today, we hope that was helpful. We'll see you in the next session. Take care, everyone.